The morning sun shimmered across the lake when HOA Karen decided she'd finally catch me. She stormed into my cabin, ranting about violations and property codes, only to stop cold. Because sitting at my table, coffee in hand, was the state attorney general herself. Karen's crusade ended before it even began. I'd bought the old lake cabin 2 years ago, weathered cedar walls, a sagging dock, and a view worth more than any HOA's rules. It wasn't in their jurisdiction, not even close, but that didn't stop the local HOA president, Karen Hollingsworth, from acting like she ran the shoreline. From the moment I moved in, she made it her mission to remind me that I was violating the neighborhood aesthetic. I wasn't part of her HOA, of course, but that didn't stop her from dropping by, snapping pictures, and sending letters about my unapproved renovation. The cabin sat about 300 feet from the HOA's official boundary, but Karen seemed to think invisible borders extended wherever she pleased. I'd been polite at first, offered her coffee, even explained that I'd checked the county plat maps myself, but she wasn't interested in facts. She wanted control, and nothing infuriated a control freak like being powerless. When spring rolled around, my property became a sort of obsession for her. She'd drive by slowly, phone out, taking photos from her Lexus. Once, I caught her walking along my dock, pretending to be inspecting water access safety. I told her to leave. She just smirked and said, "The HOA has jurisdiction over the lake." That was a lie. The lake was state-managed, open to the public, and bordered by both HOA and non-HOA land. But she didn't care. Her ego depended on pretending she was queen of the shore. The week everything went down, I had important company. The state attorney general, Linda Serrano, was visiting my cabin privately to discuss a potential environmental partnership. She'd heard I was restoring wetlands on the property and wanted to see how local conservation efforts could be replicated across other state lakes. It was a big deal. Quiet, official, but off the record. We sat at the dining table that morning, paperwork spread out beside a steaming pot of coffee. Linda was warm, sharp, and easy to talk to. I just poured her a fresh cup when I saw the familiar flash of a Lexus pulling up outside. Karen. I sighed. "You've got to be kidding me," I muttered, watching her stomp across the gravel like she owned it. Linda raised an eyebrow. "Problem?" she asked. "You could say that," I said, standing. "That's my neighborhood HOA president. She doesn't seem to understand the word boundaries." Before I could reach the door, Karen flung it open. No knock, no hesitation. Just pure entitlement. "What do you think you're doing?" she barked. "This structure isn't up to community code. You're violating setback laws, noise restrictions, and..." She stopped mid-rant when she saw Linda sitting at my table, her sharp business suit crisp against the rustic wood backdrop. Linda looked up calmly, sipped her coffee, and said, "And you are?" Karen blinked, clearly not expecting someone else, let alone someone of authority, to be there. But her arrogance kicked in like muscle memory. "I'm the HOA president," she said, straightening her pearl necklace. "This man's property is under my jurisdiction, and I have every right to inspect it." Linda smiled faintly.
"You have jurisdiction here?"
"That's interesting. Because according to the county's land registry, this parcel isn't under any homeowners association." Karen faltered, glancing between us. "Well, the lake is managed by the state," Linda interrupted smoothly. "And I happen to oversee that jurisdiction." Karen's jaw dropped slightly. I don't think you understand. There are bylaws." "Oh, I understand perfectly," Linda said, her tone now edged with authority. "You just illegally entered private property while impersonating an authority figure. That's trespassing. And if you continue speaking, it might also become harassment." Karen's face flushed red. This is outrageous," she stammered. "Indeed," Linda said. "Outrageous and unlawful." I had to hide my grin as Karen slowly backed toward the door, muttering something about miscommunication. She fumbled for her phone, probably to call her board, and bolted outside. Linda looked at me over her cup, amused. "Does she do that often?" "More than I'd like," I admitted. "You handled her better than most deputies have," she smirked. "It's part of the job." Outside, Karen's car sat idling for nearly 10 minutes before peeling away in a storm of gravel. I knew this wasn't over. People like her never left quietly. They regrouped, they plotted, and then they came back louder. Linda packed up her notes and said, "You should document this. If she keeps up, I'll have the state look into her HOA's overreach." I nodded, though a part of me doubted Karen would push things any further, at least not after getting schooled by the Attorney General. But I was wrong, because the next day she came back with backup, and this time, she wasn't just trespassing. She was staging an inspection with her entire HOA board and a county officer who didn't yet know he was walking into a legal disaster. The following morning was unnervingly quiet, the kind of quiet that always meant something was brewing. The lake shimmered under the early sunlight, mist curling above the surface like smoke. I sat on the porch with a cup of coffee, hoping Karen had learned her lesson after being humiliated in front of the state attorney general. But people like Karen didn't retreat. They regrouped. Around 9, the crunch of tires on gravel drew my attention. Not one, but 3 SUVs pulled up near my gate. Out stepped Karen, dressed in a stiff white blouse and oversized sunglasses, flanked by 2 men in cheap suits. Behind them trailed a few other HOA members with clipboards and self-important scowls. To my surprise, a county code enforcement officer was with them, a young guy named Derek who looked barely 30 and already regretting his life choices. Karen strutted up to the gate, waving a folder like a badge. "Mr. Hall," she called, "this is an official compliance inspection under local residential codes. You are required to allow access to verify your property adheres to community standards." I leaned against the porch railing and took a slow sip of coffee. "Karen," I said evenly, "we've been through this. My cabin isn't under your HOA, and you can tell your friends in their Halloween costumes to stay on their side of the fence." Her smile tightened. "Refusal to comply will be noted as obstruction." Derek, the county officer, stepped forward nervously. "Sir, I'm here on behalf of the county. There were complaints about unauthorized construction." "From her?" I asked. He hesitated. "Yes," I chuckled. "Then you've been misled. You can look up parcel number 458 LC17. It's outside HOA borders, confirmed by the county surveyor's office. You don't have jurisdiction here." Karen shot him a glare. "Don't listen to him, Derek. This land is part of the lakefront community. It's your job to enforce the ordinances." Before the argument could spiral further, a familiar black SUV pulled up behind them. I recognized it immediately on its government plates. Out stepped Attorney General Linda Serrano, dressed in casual jeans this time, but carrying the same quiet authority as before. The air shifted. Karen froze mid-sentence, eyes wide. "You—" "Good morning," Linda said briskly, flashing her ID to Derek. "I understand there's a jurisdictional issue here." Derek blinked. Ma'am, I wasn't aware you were involved." Linda smiled thinly. "You are now. This property is privately owned, outside HOA authority, and currently part of a registered conservation partnership with the state. Any interference here without cause is unlawful." Karen's voice went shrill. "This is harassment. You're colluding with this man to undermine community governance." Linda's calm expression didn't change. "Community governance doesn't include trespassing or impersonating officials. And unless you want to explain your behavior to the state ethics board, I'd suggest you step back." The group of HOA members behind her began to whisper nervously. One of the fake inspectors actually started backing toward the SUV. Karen, red-faced and sputtering, jabbed a finger toward me. "You can't get away with this. I'll call the sheriff." Linda folded her arms.
Please do.
"I'd love to explain this to him myself." Karen hesitated, but made the call anyway, barking into her phone. It didn't take long before a sheriff's cruiser pulled up, lights flashing softly. Deputy Reynolds, a man I'd known for years, stepped out. He took one look at me, then at Linda, then at Karen's entourage, and sighed like a man who already knew how this would end. "All right," he said wearily. "What's going on here?" Karen launched into her usual tirade. Violations, boundary disputes, lake rights, property code enforcement, but Reynolds stopped her mid-rant. "Karen," he said, rubbing his temples, "we've checked this before. His land isn't in your HOA. You can't enforce anything here." "But no buts," he said firmly. "And you can't just bring a bunch of people onto private property. That's trespassing." Linda stepped forward. "Deputy, for the record, this incident will be noted. I've witnessed illegal entry and attempted misuse of local authority under false pretenses." Reynolds nodded, pulling out his notebook. "Understood, ma'am." Karen's jaw dropped. "You can't take her side. She's the state attorney general," Linda said flatly. "Would you like to continue arguing?" The silence that followed was heavy enough to hear the lake breeze. Karen's entourage had completely lost their nerve. The fake inspectors disappeared toward the cars, and even Derek looked like he wanted to sink into the ground. Reynolds issued a verbal warning, one that made Karen's face go pale. "Ma'am, if you step onto this property again without permission, we'll move forward with trespassing charges. Am I clear?" Karen's lips trembled. She didn't answer. "Am I clear?" Reynolds repeated. "Yes," she finally hissed. Linda turned to me with a small smile. That should settle it for good. I wasn't convinced. Karen was the kind of person who didn't accept defeat easily. As the group left, I caught the look in her eyes, burning with humiliation and fury, and that was when I knew she'd come back one more time. Not with inspectors, not with fake authority, but with something far worse. That night, I installed motion cameras across the property. My gut told me I'd need them, and sure enough, 2 nights later, I woke to the sound of footsteps outside my cabin and a flashlight beam cutting through the dark. The wind that night carried a strange silence, the kind that pressed against your skin and warned you something was about to happen. The moon hung low over the lake, reflecting off the dark ripples like liquid glass. I'd been dozing lightly, on the couch when the faint crunch of gravel jolted me. Awake. Footsteps. Slow. Careful. Moving. Around the side of the cabin, I reached for my phone and checked the live feed from the motion cameras I'd set up days earlier. The screen lit up with grainy night vision footage, 3 figures creeping near the boathouse. One of them carried a flashlight. Another had something that looked like a crowbar. Then I saw her. Karen. She was dressed in black this time, her pearl necklace gone, replaced by a baseball cap and gloves. Behind her were 2 men, probably the same inspectors who'd come before. They were whispering, pointing toward my shed, where I stored the restoration equipment and documentation for my state conservation project. I muted my phone and slipped quietly toward the window. My heart thumped hard, not from fear but from disbelief. Karen had finally crossed the line. The trio moved along the dock, flashlights slicing through the dark. I recorded every second, zooming in on their faces, the tools in their hands, the clear intent to break in. When one of the men pried open the shed door, I hit record on a second device. The cabin's internal system synced directly with a cloud backup. There'd be no way for her to claim mistaken identity this time. Then I made the call. "Sheriff's Department, what's your emergency?" "This is Ethan Hall out by Lake Clearwater," I whispered. "I've got 3 trespassers on my property. One of them's the HOA president you warned last week. Breaking and entering in progress. I have full video footage. Stay inside, sir," the dispatcher said immediately. "Units are en route." For the next few minutes, I stayed near the window, keeping the camera rolling as Karen and her accomplices rummaged through the shed. I heard her voice clearly. "Find something illegal. Anything we can use to get him off this property. There has to be— Wait, what's this?" She pulled out a folder, one that contained the signed state agreement for the wetlands project. She flipped through the pages, clearly not understanding what she was looking at. "It's fake," she said to her men. "I'll say it's forged." That was it. The final nail. Headlights flickered in the distance, bouncing off the trees. The moment Karen noticed them, panic spread across her face. "Someone's coming!" She tried to shove the papers back into the folder, but it was too late. Sheriff Reynolds' cruiser pulled up fast, followed by 2 more units. Red and blue lights painted the shoreline, cutting through the darkness like lightning. "Hands where I can see them," Reynolds shouted as he and another deputy advanced. Karen froze, her hands trembling. The 2 men beside her bolted, only to be tackled moments later. I stepped out onto the porch, phone in hand, still recording. Reynolds turned to me. "You all right, Ethan?" "Never better," I said. "Got it all on video." Karen's voice cracked as the deputies cuffed her. "This is a misunderstanding. I was just verifying property compliance." Reynolds shook his head. "At 2 in the morning? With burglary tools? You've outdone yourself this time, Karen." As they escorted her toward the car, a familiar vehicle pulled into the drive. The same black SUV from before. Out stepped Attorney General Linda Serrano, fully dressed, her expression unreadable, but her eyes sharp. "I got the alert from your feed," she said to me quietly. "You did good. We'll handle the rest." Karen's head snapped toward her. "You again! You're part of this conspiracy." Linda approached calmly. No, Mrs. Hollingsworth, I'm part of the state government. And you just broke multiple laws under my jurisdiction: trespassing, attempted theft of government property, and obstruction of an ongoing environmental partnership. Karen's knees seemed to give out. Government? Property? She repeated weakly. Linda nodded. The documents you tried to steal are federally backed under environmental grant protection. You didn't just break into a man's shed. You tampered with state files. The deputies exchanged looks. Reynolds exhaled slowly. That's going to be one hell of a report. As Karen was read her rights, she broke down in tears, muttering about protecting community standards. The irony of it nearly made me laugh. When the cruisers pulled away, the lake fell silent again. Linda and I stood near the dock, watching the red and blue reflections fade over the water. She'll be facing real charges now, Linda said, and I'll be filing an injunction against that HOA for overreach. This should stop them from bothering anyone else for a while. I nodded, relief washing over me. I appreciate everything, Linda. Guess I owe the state a favor. She smiled faintly. Just keep the wetlands thriving. That's favor enough. As dawn began to break, the mist rose off the lake like smoke from a battle finally over. The air smelled of pine and rain, and the only sounds were the soft lapping of water and a distant loon calling across the shore. I took a long breath, stepping back onto my porch, my property, my peace, finally mine again. For the first time in months, I felt the weight lift. No more fake inspections. No more threats. Just the quiet promise of a morning untouched by Karen's chaos. Inside, I poured a fresh cup of coffee, sat by the window, and watched the sun rise over the lake. And when I saw the sheriff's cruiser parked across the water for patrol, I couldn't help but smile. This time the law wasn't on Karen's side. It was standing guard, right where it belonged.